A few months ago, I just saw these logos and I was like, wow, this is something else. This is something very different from what you would experience from typical designer. You probably have heard that AI and machine learning are going to be some of the primary causes for your job to disappear. A lot of designers who got quite defensive about it because they always said that you could never replace a creative flair, abilities to connect the dots and make something bold and outstanding. If you think about it, and we go a few years back in, let's say, additive manufacturing, like 3D printing and neural networks there, some of the parts which AI creates are much more sturdy, much more cost effective because they need less material. They appear much more organic in their nature. So it's obvious that it's generated by something else but not human being, because we think in basic shapes naturally and we combine them all to come up with a structure which is quite consistent and sort of predictable. And today I have another example of that. And it's about a designer, a remote worker in Russia, who's part of a creative studio, Art Lebedev, who has been working remotely, coming up with designs which are actually chargeable as an AI. And let me tell you, Nikolai is an awesome dude. Or should I say entity, I guess would be a most appropriate way to describe it. And so for over a year, producing different designs for a lot of different clients, Nikolai as an AI is available 24 hours a day. He doesn't get sick, he doesn't have creative blocks, he's always developing new concepts and producing them in seconds. However, nobody knew about it, except for this Black operations team within the studio who came up with it, from designers and developers. And now we're being quite open as a studio, saying that it's a designer and neural network. There are a few different examples of what that AI came up with, which look really good. They look very crude, but also have something unique to them. And as you can see, other examples are, for example, brand identities for, YouTubers and influencers, the real product packaging, which looks awesome if you ask me. That looks like, something I want to have in my hand and just have a sip. Brand identities for restaurants, logos, things of that nature. I also describe how that AI works with the clients. Let's say a brief was verb, then it would produce so many different iterations, allow for, let's say, some sort of input. So maybe checking the keywords like text, gradients, crazy, whatever that means, and then it would probably try to redesign the existing logo with thousands of other inputs. And as you can see, then once that's done, I guess you can also pass it to, a human counterpart and edit it and come up with, a campaign, different options for the brand, things of that nature. And so how does Nikolai as a neural network do it? This is super interesting. He gets a lot of shapes, imagery. I wonder where from. Is it from history of art, other logos? That's what's interesting to me. Where do the data signals come from? Raw information come from? He comes up with his own shapes, making a new data set, checking the keywords from the descriptions from the client brief, forms his new images and reshapes it, I guess, based on the data sets, and transforms it in a lot of different styles, remixes it and reshapes it, produces thousands of outcomes, and then takes one, I guess, which is the best one, which I would assume that the human counterpart comes in and then picks and chooses exactly which ones should be taken forward for, let's say, next iterations. Some of these are so bold and so creative. A few months ago, I just saw these logos and I was like, wow, this is something else. This is something very different from what you would experience from typical designer. This AI has its own personal style almost. If you look at all those designs, they all look super connected. They all look like they are done by the same artist. Like, for example, I could see taking each of these, modifying it a little bit as a human, and then making it a decent brand design. And looking at actual reviews from the clients, they're all saying that it's fresh, memorable, cool, worth the money. And I can agree with that, because if you think about it, Nikolai and the studio charge only 1,500 per logo. And it almost doesn't matter how crazy or how cheap it is, it's very affordable option. And it should be. If the client would have been told in the beginning that it's going to be done by AI, probably the price would be even lower. But I wonder if they told them afterwards that, hey, this is AI, and so we're not charging you much. But also could be differences in the markets, because in the Western world, you as a client for a big brand, you might pay tens and thousands of dollars for a simple logo or a simple design. As far as today, Nikolai completed over 20 projects, which is grand because it has a novelty factor to it. As a client, you might say, hey, I want my brand to be designed by AI instead of a human counterpart, or at least see how it works, because as a human, you might come up with 100 ideas and only one of them is going to be gold dust. As AI, you might come up with tens and thousands of ideas, and 1,000 maybe are going to be good ones, but a human needs to pick and choose which ones are those, which are going to automate the tedious tasks for you so that you can focus on much more bigger picture or much more impactful decisions as a human being. Now, the interesting bit for you as a designer, and one thing which you might consider, is the copyright. If a neural network produces all these bits, who owns the intellectual property? Is it the studio who maintains it, or is it the client? Or should it be accredited to the actual AI, but in that case, who's a beneficiary of that? So there's a lot of different interesting questions which we might need to answer as designers, as strategists going forward, and also put in place some measures so that we can actually properly assess this. So what do you think? Is this the future? Does it concern you? Does it excite you? Leave a comment down below. Give a like if you like this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to this. And on that note, I'll see you next time.